Thank you for being here. Thank you for participating, and thank you for those amazing presentations this morning. I think I might have been implicated by one of those at least. Anyway, it's amazing to be up here with this so much power on this stage. Thanks to the panelists and our moderator. So I'm going to do some very brief introductions, and then I'm going to pass over the mic to Margaret Kingsland, who is going to take over the show. So first of all, I want to introduce our panelists, starting with Maureen, who's to the right of Margaret Kingsland here. And Maureen was born in Helena, Montana, received her BA in art, specialized in sculpture from the University of Montana. Maureen I had the pleasure of being her professor in a couple of courses. So Maureen also went on to do a master's degree in sculpture at the State University of New York, SUNY New Paltz. And then she has come back to us in Missoula, thank goodness, and she's currently a graduate student at the University of Montana in the field of clinical mental health, which is an amazing program, and it's good to have you back. Maureen has modeled for the PCLS between the years 2006 and 2008. Maureen McCourt, welcome. Then the second model to Maureen's right is Joyce Gibbs. And Joyce Gibbs is a new friend, I have to say, although she's been in Missoula for a while now. So I'm just going to give you a bit. By the way, she has modeled for PCLS since about the year 2000. Not quite clear exactly when she started, but it's been a while. So Joyce is a resilient, creative human being, an adventurous woman who was raised in Missoula. And after a brief stint in New York City and New Orleans, she bought a dilapidated railroad house in Missoula's north side. Wow. Spent the next 15 years remodeling it and making it her own. Joyce loves being in nature on Montana's abundant rivers, hiking and hunting in the woods. And when she's not busy building beautiful spaces with her tile installation at Joyce of Tile, you can find her riding her motorcycle, gardening, going for neighborhood walks with Mark, her husband of 12 years, and their perpetual kitten, Ziggy. Welcome, Joyce. And now, Janet Whaley is the first artist member of the Pattee Canyon Ladies Salon to Joyce's right. Janet was born in Wallace, Idaho, neighboring state. She received her MFA and her BFA in ceramics from the University of Montana. And she also received her RN in nursing from St. Patrick Hospital School of Nursing here in Missoula. And she joined the PCLS in 1998. And I also must add, 96, yes, my aging eyes here. In 1996. And I also have to add that Janet Whaley was among my very first graduate students at the University of Montana, and it's a privilege to be on the same stage with her. Thank you, Janet.
Likewise.
Okay, and to Janet's right is Sherry Montana, who was born in Roseburg, Oregon. She also received her BFA in art at the University of Montana and her BA in clinical psychology. So interesting trajectories between these two artists here, science and art. That's a theme, a recurring theme in this group. I don't know if you've noticed, but who is Leonardo? Who cares? So she received her BA in clinical psych from Eastern Washington University in Cheney. And then she also studied at the American School of Art in Umbria, Italy, where she studied encaustic art making. Also in Umbria and in San Francisco, CA. And she's been a member of the PCLS since 1992. And Janet Whaley, I have the pleasure of saying, was among my first undergraduate students at the University of Montana. Sorry, Sherry. Janet, first grad students, Sherry, undergraduate students. Yes, wonderful. Thank you for being here. To her right is Stephanie Frostad. Stephanie was born in Walla Walla, and she received her MFA in painting from the University of Montana. And she has also studied at the Studio Arts Center International in Florence, Italy. Again, another recurring pattern among the group. A lot of people studying abroad, especially in Italy. And she also received a BFA from the Maryland Institute the College of Art in Baltimore. And Stephanie is one of the younger members of the PCLS. She joined the group in 2005, so that was just a couple years ago. And I have to say, one of my biggest regrets is having missed Stephanie Frostad as a graduate student by 1 year.
I was actually on the hiring committee.
That's true. I owe her my life, my career. So thank you, Stephanie. Yes, but it's definitely been a privilege to be a friend, and it's been a privilege to watch your career all these years in this community. So thank you, Stephanie. Okay, and then at the far right of the stage, or your far left, excuse me, is Beth Lowe. I don't think Beth needs an introduction, but let's give it to her anyway. Beth Lowe was born in Lafayette, Indiana. Yay, another Hoosier. She was educated in, she had her MFA in ceramics from the University of Montana, and she also has a BGS in general studies from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And she joined the PCLS in 1992. And I have the pleasure of saying that Beth and I were colleagues for a quarter of a century. I miss her so much, but it was a lot of fun while we were working together. So thank you, all of you, and we're really looking forward to the panel. Oh no, there's one more very important introduction, excuse me. And that is your panel moderator, the inimitable Margaret Kingsland, who is a graduate of a women's college, Pembroke College at Brown University, right? And she has her PhD in literature and has served, and thank God, she served as the executive director, or thank Goddess, served as executive director of the Montana Committee for the Arts for a quarter, for the humanities, right? Sorry, different committee, but very important committee as well. And she served for 20 years with that august organization. 23 years, okay. She is a critic and an amazing writer, and by the way, there's a beautiful dedication in the catalog written by Margaret Kingsland. She's also a civil rights worker and a generalist. She's an amazing scholar, as you'll hear from her moderation today. And she's also a collector of art, a collector of the art of this group, and her focus in her collections is on Indigenous American art and women artists. Margaret, thank you for doing this, and we look forward to this panel.
Thank you, Rafael, and all the planners. Yes. For putting together this wonderful arts and humanities program, and for having the foresight also to have it recorded and live streamed, so that more people who didn't want to be challenged by the parking issues, which are chronic at this campus, can also enjoy hearing and maybe seeing what these interesting presentations have involved. I'm going to be asking both the models and the artists to speak, and first we'll be hearing from the artists, and then we'll be hearing from the models, and then we'll open it up for discussion among the group and discussion from the audience. But as I was thinking about this and preparing for it, I was reflecting on the fact that 3 weeks ago I was the discussion leader for the talkback programs after 2 dance performances, which were presented by the dance group and arts group, Arts and Above. And my close friends, Kate Jordan Augusto and Bruno Augusto, are both choreographers, and they were presenting pieces. Kate's was a particularly beautiful, long, more than 15-minute long quintet, and thinking about their art and the dancers and the choreographers and the composer. Bruno's also a composer. Talking about that work and talking with the audience, I was reminded, of course, how collaborative that kind of work is, and how people working in performing arts of that sort always have built-in collaborators, but how lonely it is to be a working artist. And we've heard some allusions to that this morning, and that wonderful, wonderful art history presentation by Rafael and Christy gave us the context for thinking about working from live models, with live models, life drawing, and then the terrific history of the group shows the importance of the form, the kinds of ways in which people work as artists, and the value of there being collaborative or cooperative opportunities. So we're going to be focusing this afternoon on the impact of working in community on both the artists and the experience of working as models with this and other groups. So I'm going to start by asking one by one the artists to answer 3 questions, which I know they've been thinking about, and we'll then ask the artists to answer a couple of questions that they've also been thinking about. We'll have a discussion among the group and then open it up to the audience, as I said. And at that time, we'll also ask that any people in the audience who are also members or former members of the Pattee Canyon Ladies Salon, or models or former models for the group, to also come up and receive our applause and gratitude. So my first question will be for Janet Whaley, and it is, and I'm going to be asking this question of every artist here, how did working regularly with a group affect your work, your art?
I think it's been addressed that working in solitude in your own studio keeps you, well, I'll start like when I was in graduate school. My studio was around other people. So people were coming in and out and commenting on my work, and I would comment on their work. But then after graduation, moving into my own studio was such solitude. And I was lucky to be asked right about that time to join the Pattee Canyon Ladies Salon. So that was a big moment for me, because I had a community. And it was kind of a built-in community. I felt very lucky and honored to be part of that group. So the group itself is, everybody has a high level of professionalism within the group, and respect for each other and each other's work. So my brain is kind of wandering, but there's a sense of encouragement. I was complaining to Nancy one time that I wasn't getting any ideas, and I was very frustrated. And she said, well, are you still going into your studio? And at that time, I had not been working in my studio as much as I needed to. And so that was the anecdote for artist block, was just to go in the studio and not worry about anything. So doing ceramics, there's a lot of kind of mindless things that you can, wedging clay, throwing pots, and all of that kind of opens your mind up to nothingness, and then that's when the ideas come. So she was absolutely right that just going to your studio is all you need to do. So that kind of encouragement from Nancy, from other people, not judging each other's work. There's something my husband would always say, that you can only do the work you can do. You can't do the work that other people do. And so that kind of lifts feeling competitive or judging my work, or comparing my work. So there's none of that, and it's very freeing. So.
And so, can you talk a little bit, Janet, about the things that you might have learned from other artists in the group that influenced how your art evolved or changed?
So I think just the nature of drawing, I'm thinking that it's kind of there. Okay, I'll get my words. There's a muscle memory with drawing. So the more you do it, the less you think about it, and so just being in the group has allowed for that. And since I do a lot of imagery on my pots, it lends confidence just by being part of the group. Learning from other people in the group, I think because we're not just working in the drawing group, a lot of times we plan other events like plein air painting or just movie going, things like that, that kind of allows for that.
And would you say, Janet, that accounts for the longevity of the group, or what do you think is the key to the longevity?
Well, I think in years past, the longevity I would have to attribute to Nancy Erickson. She was the glue that held everything together, and with her passing, I don't think we realized how much she actually, I mean, we knew what she did, but we didn't know the importance of, well, like she would get the models together, and a lot of times models, not Joyce or Maureen, but sometimes models were hard to get, and she took care of all of the collecting of fees, the paying of the model, contacting us individually. A lot of times she sent notes, cards, but always the email to remind us of the drawing group. So, and then not to mention having her studio available and the work that she put into getting it ready, always clean newsprint on each table, and just being very welcoming and having it wonderful.
Thanks, Janet. Sherry, the same questions for you. The first one is about how working regularly with the group affects your work, your art.
What I really got from working with the group regularly was a respect for practice, and I made notes so I wouldn't forget. And that in practice comes not only the skill of drawing, but inspiration, the muscle memory that Janet talked about, but also inspiration in creating a line or a shape or and some interesting aspect of how we see the figure or interpret the figure, but also watching each other's work and seeing some small gesture or something that somebody else made can be inspiring and take me off on a tangent for weeks or months, trying to see where that little bit can go. And it might just have been an interesting line or a shape that somebody, or color that somebody brought in during that session. I also think that in our sessions, we had a lot of conversation, a lot of things that were of mutual interest to us as women that are, I think, more universal. Health concerns, family, relationship issues, as well as our professional life with our artwork and how to pursue that. All those discussions really contributed to my personal development, my growth, and my artwork, and where that went. And I guess, and it contributed energetically to the drawings that we take away, that I took away from those sessions. And then I'm able to identify those sessions just by the energy I can feel in my drawings when I get them at home. I save them all, they're in a flat file. And then every year I go through them And I can remember that energy that was there in those discussions that we had, and how that influenced where my artwork might even have gone for subject matter or at that time. And then some of the things that Janet mentioned, affirmation, no judgment, also encouragement from everybody to grow and stretch the limits of what we were drawing, mediums that we might be using or challenging or experimenting with. We got lessons from Beth's mother on doing Chinese painting and how that informs, some of the things that we did.
And so, do you have different observations about this key to the longevity of the group, Sherry?
I think it really does come around to Nancy. At the same time, what Nancy was a leader at being a lateral leader, where the whole group always had input. And so I think what we really experienced under Nancy's tutelage, without tutoring us, we all learned to be lateral leaders within the group, about collaboration and cooperation, always. And do I get to answer the question about what I learned?
Yes.
From people?
What did you learn from your
Because
companions that
it's been
influenced
really
your work?
important to me. I just want to, because I made a note from Nancy, I really learned about a sense of being vulnerable, and not the way some of the life models were that we saw in this group, vulnerable and at risk, but really vulnerable as a way of being powerful and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable to each other, to the possibilities that she brought to us. And that was incredibly empowering to me. From Beth, I had Beth as an instructor along with Rafael. Beth gave an assignment that changed my whole world in art, and it was about choosing something from my background, my ethnicity, which I had not one, being a white girl in the United States. But it took me back to exploring our history and trying to find out who I was. My mother said we had Native American ancestry, which we absolutely did not. Thanks to Ancestry.com. I know that for sure. But it would have been really embarrassing to have done something from that culture that wasn't mine. But that really sent me on because I didn't really have a subject matter, and it really set a course for me on what I wanted to explore as far as subject matter. And then Leslie was a really amazing tutor for professionalism and professional practice, presentation, always encouraging professional development, but artistic development as well. Christy was always a major example of skill and experimenting. Linda always was outside the box with mediums, and Becky did digital things in drawing. She would literally draw on a digital contraption. Sorry. It wasn't my forte, but I did try it. I gave it away, but I did try it. And Stephanie, just the professionalism and always her pursuit of women's themes, and her just always. And then Janet, following the archetype and the mythology that she brings to her work, it was always freeing and let me explore my own path, because they all represented so many different things. It's all been amazing. Sorry, not to be long-winded.
Not at all. You're under 10 minutes, and we have 10 minutes for each. And it's very interesting to hear specifically attributes or ways in which you were stimulated by various individuals' work. Thanks very much for
And I don't know if we get to answer the question, but the models are incredible contributors to the energy of what happens in the drawing sessions as well. I just want to mention that.
Give them credit. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Sherry. And Stephanie, how did working regularly with this group affect your work, your art?
Well, I will go ahead and state the obvious because I don't know that it's come up, but I work with the figure naturalistically. So being able to study the figure in life informs what I do in my paintings, even if my paintings are often photo-based. And as an example, the 3 Against the Current paintings that appear in this show in the Malloy Gallery, those are all blurry photos. I was waist deep in the Blackfoot on a cold day with my friend taking these pictures, and they did not come out crisply. But I feel like I can more confidently work off a blurry image and clarify things because I have the experience in space, you know, in the same moment with a live model that informs my visual memory, and then I can bring that to virtually any old little blurry photo that I use, as well as it's just, I almost consider observation a spiritual practice in terms of becoming grounded and present through it. The other thing I would say about the group, and we have touched on how most artwork is done in solitude, and every artwork is a series of decisions. Some decisions are very fundamental or based in one's philosophy, sensibilities, training, chosen medium. Some of those decisions are more spontaneous or playful, but still, it almost all happens when you're alone. And what this group has done, not for a day or a semester or a year, but for literally decades, is expose all these different decision-making processes. I don't know that there's any way I could say, because Sherry did these things, it led me here, or with anyone else in the group. It's not quite so specific as an impact on my vision or practice, but I feel like my own decision-making process is stimulated and refreshed by literally witnessing a group working with the same subject matter on the same day and bringing forth such distinct artworks.
Encouraging confidence in trying different ways of seeing, it sounds like.
Absolutely, and I think that there's also a process in which it affirms one's choices. It's like, yeah, this is where my strength lies. This is what intrigues me. But yeah, it's very refreshing.
And are there specific things that you learned from your companions in the earlier phase or the later phase that influenced your work, Stephanie?
Well, I feel like that has had an impact that's hard to trace in a way I can give evidence to.
Yeah.
Where there may be some evidence is when I first met Nancy, if I can speak again to our beloved leader, in the early 90s, I was really impressed with her commitment to peace and social justice, and then continued to learn about her ecofeminism and how that informs her work, not just in a polemical sense, but in her great heart for her subject. And I too am interested in where nature and culture meet and intermingle. And more and more I'm devoted to portraying human beings in relationship to the natural world. And one of the things that's happened over this period that I've been in Pattee Canyon is where before I often worked with the human subject close to life size in the foreground, more and more I'm inclined to subordinate the human drama to other living things. There could be a life-size sunflower and then a 5-inch figure, you know, seen past it. And I feel like there are things about Nancy's vision, as different as our sensibilities are, our palettes, our materials, everything, about the way she brought creatures and elements from the natural world together with humans and in culture, that has encouraged and inspired me in this sort of tack in my work. So I do feel like I can attribute that to not only being exposed to her finished work, but seeing things in progress. And often my favorite times at Pattee Canyon is when I got there early and I could just sit in the studio with Nancy and talk about the links on the wall. And yeah, things like that. So I feel like she's someone I do sense a more direct sort of impact on how my vision has evolved and what aspirations I remain most devoted to in my own work.
I'm thinking of a beautiful drawing of a horse that I saw years ago in your studio, the creatureliness of the animal and the close and I would say loving observation of the animal that comes through, that radiates through in that drawing. I don't know if you even remember it, but that's clear in so many of Nancy's pieces too, affirming that is so valuable to the people who see it. It calls us to respect and honor and think of our own creatureliness and its value in life. Yeah. And do you want to talk about what you think is the key to the longevity of the group, Stephanie?
Well, certainly, and I know I'll be echoing the others, but I also want to make this point. So I've hosted students and classes and groups in my studio, and I know that apart from what you do practically, for example, wiping down the tables and putting down the newsprint and rearranging the chairs, there is a kind of psychological effort in taking this private place, opening to the public, and then also reclaiming it, reabsorbing whatever imagery or energy rather was brought by the assembly. And so I really recognize that in addition to all the practical organizational work she did, she went through that process twice a month for 33 years. And that's awesome, and it's inspiring in its own way to the extent that any of us or all of us are also leaders who try to facilitate art and creative experience with others. So I want to affirm again Nancy's enormous gifts of hospitality to the group, but to acknowledge that without that, the occasions through which we've bonded simply wouldn't have occurred. And so her dedication and consistency were, I think, really critical to the development of the group and its longevity.
And that lovely graciousness and humanity and openness to others, which she just shared so generously, is so invaluable in the world. Yeah. Thank you, Stephanie. Beth, all yours.
I think it's all been said. I only have a few little things to add to this great conversation. And thank you, Margaret, for being our panel director. Just to go back to that sense of support that we all felt and the lack of judgment. One of the things, since I actually taught figure drawing at the university several times over the course of my 30 years there, I taught figure drawing and figure sculpture, but you always had to have a critique at the end of class. So you had to put up your work and you had to have people point out what was wrong with it or what they liked about it. But there was a lot of ego that got destroyed during some of those sessions, and people were discouraged and people had a hard time, and sometimes it wasn't, the critiques weren't even what I would say right, you know. Critiques could go on a jag in some weird direction. But with our group, I was actually shocked the first time I came to a drawing session and nobody put anything up on the wall. And so that was interesting. And at first I thought, well, how are we going to learn? But then I realized you just trust yourself and you trust each other and you develop. So that sense of support was really good. The community, the groupness of it, if I go to the question of what did I learn, I don't know that I learned I love all the things that you talked about, but I don't know that I learned tons specifically, technically, or about drawing so much as I learned acceptance, and then I learned so much about being a human being from this group. And I know a lot of it comes from Nancy and Nancy's example of how to be with other people. And I think I said this in our interview with Corey earlier. It's an interesting thing happens when everybody is doing something that they love all together. And I compared it to hiking. And like sometimes in hiking, you don't say anything to each other. You just are with the environment. And then something comes up in somebody's head and they think of, oh, well, my kid did this. And then you start talking about kids. And that's how it was in this drawing group. You get this incredible sense of natural conversation, which being a little bit of a I don't know, what's this called, a Luddite? I'm a social Luddite. I'm not that good in the social world. So it's like playing games with people or eating with people. The conversation is genuine and flows, and I love that. Then I learned about who to vote for and what to eat and how to cook. You know, you learn all these, lots of things like that. So that's all really good. One other thing about community, I had a conversation recently with a friend who wanted to try to figure out what to do with their kid who was not really good at sports and not really good at music, but was really good at art. And this was a kid going into middle school, and they had no group, you know. This was something, they could do it all by themselves, but they didn't get that bonding thing that you get in sports and ability to work through growing up and puberty and all that stuff with a group. So I think more of that, if that can happen with younger people, I think it would be really helpful. So
that is such a good point, and we haven't addressed that so far today, but that's such an interesting observation, Beth. And how essential just being with others in community is, and how much is lost when we're just focusing on screens and what we can do with our thumbs. It seems like a tragic loss, and it's so interesting to hear in some detail about the comfort of community to the solitary, otherwise work of an artist. And the models are essential to these gatherings every 2 weeks. And so we're going to hear from two of the models, starting with Maureen McCourt, who is one of the earlier ones, and then the more recent is Joyce. So Maureen, we had a couple of questions specifically for the models. Well, first of all, as a general one, is to ask you to describe your experience of working with this group of women artists. And then after that, how this differs, if at all, from your experience of working with other groups or with mixed groups of men and women artists.
So this was kind of my first experience modeling. I had done a little bit in art school modeling for fellow students. And so I saw an ad, I think it was in the Chacon, and I called Nancy, and she's immediately warm, even over the phone. I was so nervous, and so I drove up to the house, and immediately meeting her and getting to the house, I just felt this is gonna work. Like, I don't feel nervous anymore. She just, was just so warm and talked me through where the bathroom was, this beautiful robe, all of these things. And then going into her space was, for me, kind of amazing, being like a younger artist and seeing such a beautiful studio space. And then having this experience of modeling, which can sometimes be really uncomfortable. You're holding poses for a long time. You you don't have clothes on. It can be really uncomfortable. But what I found was, one, they made it as comfortable as possible. The heat was always on. I had a space heater. I felt great. There was always warm tea and cookies. And also, the conversation as a model that I got to witness with these women artists was unbelievable for me. I would hear all about books and movies and music and families, and it was such a neat experience being in that space, and kind of witnessing these very well-established female artists making work and connecting with each other and being a young female artist. It was incredibly influential watching this connection happen. But there was just such a comfort and care that I just felt every time I went. It was a great experience. I mean, it wasn't about, getting paid, even though by far got paid the most ever in any of the modeling I did with this group. But it wasn't about that. I think for me, it was just about that experience and personalities and just seeing all of this amazing work being done, but also this amazing conversation happening.
And Maureen, you've worked modeling for other groups, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I've done some modeling after I got really comfortable. I had another experience doing modeling with an open group, and it was at an organization. And I think it's a really good way to kind of look at what the difference was. So I showed up, and it was in the winter. There was no space heater. I don't think there was a robe. I remember I could change behind these curtain things. I was so cold. So that was a little rough. And also it was both men and women. And I was okay with that. But the part that kind of became odd for me is that during a break, one of the artists came up to me and just started asking me a lot of personal questions. And so it was one of those situations where I remember thinking, I don't think this is the right environment for me to do this. Now being older, I know how I would have handled that, but I remember kind of, having a male kind of asking you where you work felt really uncomfortable for me. And it also made me think about how safe I felt in this group, and that was not anything I ever thought about, that there would be no boundary crossing. So it was very influential. I also think these women taught me early on. Sometimes I think, especially in art school, you can feel like it's a really competitive environment. We all need to be, kind of pushing our way through. And when I went to grad school, I think through this group I saw you're so much stronger if you can collaborate and support each other. And I feel like that really helped me develop a lot of my relationships with female artists in particular, and how you can kind of have a different dynamic about support and collaboration and grow in that, rather than thinking about competing for that one opportunity or that professor's, you want them to think you're the best in class. So I got a lot out of this group. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. And Joyce, the same questions for you. How would you describe your experience of working with this group of women artists?
With this group of women,
Yeah.
It's been the last 20 years of my life.
Commitment.
It's longer than I worked on my house. And it's been said by the artists, and it's been said by Maureen as well. The sense of understanding, being able to be myself, be challenged, be heard and be accepted has been amazing. This group, I'm going to grab my notes. Being in a realm of, what, as Maureen was saying, a place of comfort, but also seeing the, having the example of being a professional artist and seeing the practice that needed to happen. And for 2 times a month, I got to watch and witness that practice, and I got to be the muse, or the catalyst, actually, not the muse, the catalyst of, like, I understand that my position is extremely important for these professional women to be able to do their job. But also watching them do the job and create the practice and practice with each other, and also open up to each other, and you know, talk about the children and talk about the grandchildren and celebrate the wins, or the celebrate, and also come together to create a show once a year, and how everyone pitched in and was part of that community and did their jobs and created something together, and also being able to take those, what I would consider like the rough images of what we did in the studio, and create finished, beautiful pieces of work that were in the show. So yeah, it was, for a while, I thought of it as I was a fly on the wall before I became comfortable interacting with the group, and then feeling the acceptance and warmth and understanding that I was going to tea with the ladies, you know, and twice a week or twice a month I got to go to tea with the ladies, and then being able to interact with them, and now we're friends, and now we go for walks, and we go to dinner, and one of the ladies sewed my slip, my slip for my wedding dress, and just feeling encouraged and guided through my own process. It's been wonderful. It's I guess as a final note, understanding that, I think someone else said this, but what I'm creating is myself, and an understanding that we're all artists, and that is, sorry, I'm so emotional, but I'm not sorry, so I'm just gonna take that away. But that is what we do, living, and you've exemplified that so well for me, of being that the greatest thing we could do is create ourselves. That's what we're all doing, and it takes practice. So thank you. I can
See that it touches your heart. It touches all of our hearts too, and thank you for opening us to those feelings in ourselves, because I think we've all been touched in unusual ways during this conference. Thank you, Joyce. modeling that. Joyce, did you want to compare working with this group to other groups you might have worked with?
One of the first and greatest differences that I noticed, because I started modeling about 30 years ago for art classes here at the U, and that's I ended up modeling for Beth's class, and so that's how I got to the Pattee Canyon Ladies Salon, was through Beth, and they were always like a very serious, like I'm standing in the middle on the podium, and there's artists, students all around, and they're all looking at me as an object to draw, and almost silent, and or an object to sculpt, and just like they're all busy doing their own thing, and there's no interaction of the community of that. And so walking into the studio at Nancy's, where they were all friends and chatting with each other and encouraging each other and not talking about art at all, or sometimes talking about art, but there were like so many other things to talk about and catch up on and encourage each other with. Yeah, a place of comfort, I think, and comfort with each other.
Yes.
And the community.
Yes. We've been hearing a lot about characteristics that I would define as feminist characteristics in the behaviors of this group. We haven't talked specifically about that, and I don't know if people would like to do that, but we're going to open up the discussion to the whole group. And before we do that, I would really appreciate it, I'm sure we would all appreciate it, if other people who are in the audience who have been members of the Pattee Canyon Ladies Salon and or models for them would kindly stand up and come forward, and you're most welcome to join us on the stage also if you would like to do that while we continue our discussion. Anybody in the audience here? I don't see any. Oh, here comes a person. Looks like Christy. And Leslie. Rachel. So, thank you very much, Christy and Leslie. And Christy and Leslie need no introduction. Rachel Simpson is here too. Thank you, Rachel. So I'd like to open it up first for discussion or questions from these people on the stage to one another. Stephanie, did you have some observations you wanted to make or to initiate discussion among the group here before we open it up to the audience?
Oh, wow. I hadn't prepared anything, but I am actually quite intrigued by what you brought up a moment ago. Like, what do we think of as specifically feminist characteristics in either artistic endeavor or in collective action? I would love to hear the variety of responses this group could provide.
I think one of the things that Joyce referenced is the universality of what happened in the community aspect, in the conversations, in the mutual support when it comes to family and friends and process, art process even. But the universality of the energy in the group translates to our artwork and makes it accessible to the viewer and supporters because it's relatable in that universal way.
I think one of the things is the lateral decision making. I think you were the one who raised that, weren't you, Sherry? Yeah, I was quite struck by that. It's very ideally characteristic of the way feminist groups conduct themselves. Christy, you have...
I would like to acknowledge that Linda Tawney could not be here today, our other member. And Becky's not here. Linda Tawney is in France. Yay.
Okay.
I did want to just address the name of our group, which I am speaking not just for myself, but I'm not sure for everybody in the group, but I always saw it as a bit tongue-in-cheek because, you know, before women had access to life model classes, their contributors, they were allowed to draw still lifes and landscapes, and they were hobbyists and amateurists and were held in contempt by serious male artists. And so there were ladies' classes, and so to call ourselves the Ladies Salon was just owning that name and saying, yeah, we're the Ladies Salon and watch out, sort of. You know. So that's how I viewed it. And so I think, I don't know, I think we all ended up in that group because we wanted to do what we wanted to do. And whether we were having our art have a feminist centrality or not, we were acting to fulfill what we needed to do to become who we are, as Joyce said.
Become whole human beings. Yeah.
And I'd like to add to what Christy said, which is, you know, I mentioned earlier that we were like groups of women. And women have traditionally, at least from my point of view, cooperated a lot more, like in the agricultural world, in the ancient world. It was the women that were doing that. The women were getting together and making the clay pots. And so the fact that we're women getting together drawing and then going way beyond that in many ways, individually and as a group, that seems like the heart of feminism to me.
Well, another little thing that would fall sort of more in the academic realm of feminism in the art world was that women, like in the 60s probably, the art world didn't want to see anything decorative. They didn't want to see anything with color. They didn't want to see anything with narrative or detail or small. Yeah. So I think we all just took it for granted because that's what we do. And it wasn't an aggressive statement, but it still, I think our group had a kind of philosophy that underlay our work, that was all great and accepted.
I wanted to say something to you, Beth, when I was your student. And
I had
a long time ago.
I had Stephanie and Sherry and Linda and Maureen. So professor. Thank you, Beth.
I remember you were doing a critique of my work, and I had a compulsion to make decorations all over my pots, and I still do. And but you told me to, and they were kind of beginning attempts, and you had told me that I had a great decorative sense of sense, and to go with it and elaborate on it. And so that's what I did. And thank you.
It's a lovely thing to hear.
Rachel.
I wanted to add to what you're saying about the Ladies Salon, the name, is that throughout history, subversive groups like suffragists and abolitionists and a million type of groups over the years have had names that sometimes camouflaged what kind of a group they really were and how strong they were in order for self-protection.
That's such a good point. And I'm reminded that at roughly the same time, this group came together, and maybe if Kim Anderson is still here, she might be able to correct me about this. It seems to me that there was a Rattlesnake Ladies Writing Group. Is that right, Kim? Kim says yes. Yeah. It was kind of a product of the moment because it was essential, because this has been a very male town, and it was very difficult to make space for women. And in my job alone, if I were not pushing everybody trying to plan a program to include the voices of women and Indians, if that person was a man, it was highly unlikely that there would never be a woman or an Indian speaking. I mean, we just had to use our elbows, and thank you for using yours, ladies.
Awesome.
It seems to me it was
About the time we decided, it evolved somehow, that we wanted to start exhibiting as a group. There was no place in Missoula that would do nudes. Jeff Sutton did a little bit with Nancy Erickson's work. So Leslie, I mean, it was such a timely thing for her to purchase the building and then offer that space, because the feedback we got from the galleries was that no one was interested in buying nudes or having nudes. But it was like Leslie mentioned in her talk, people would come early. We would say we opened at 5 o'clock, but we had the blue light special people who showed up at 4:30 because they were so interested in what we were doing. So it was really a great opportunity, and it proved everybody wrong in the galleries.
Rachel, yeah.
Something else to add. As a docent for the 5th grade program, sometimes at the Missoula Art Museum, I've had like a 5th grader look at a piece of work that maybe had a small nude in it somewhere or something and go, "That's inappropriate." And I was flummoxed, because how do you explain to a 10-year-old about the differences between male gaze and what turning someone into an object is about, and how this might be different? And hopefully we are all learning that and teaching that to ourselves and each other, so in the future we can explain and we can understand the differences.
Well, we have lots of time for questions from the audience, and excuse me if I can't see all that well because of the strange lighting, but I see I see Rafael's got a hand, Greg has a hand, and there's a gentleman behind Greg. So can we do, yes, Rafael first, then Greg, then the gentleman behind you.
There's 2 people back there.
Oh, there are 2 people back there. Oh, sorry. Meg. Okay, sorry.
Obviously, what we've seen here is an amazing evolution through feminism that in some ways allowed and helped the Pattee County Ladies Salon get established and clearly revolutionize the paradigm, the way that we see the new figure. But this is still a binary conversation. It is still a male-female conversation. And what you do is exclusive in the sense that you've chosen to draw the female. Would there ever be a day in which this group would do a female who was not born female?
Yes.
Sure. I would have no reservations.
No?
I have a
really interesting
I have a thought about that, and I don't know exactly. For me, it's always been a question. Why do I like to draw the female body more than I like to draw the male body? And I don't know that I have the answer to that, except for I know that I do. And then I also question the eroticism and what's going on with that. And because I like a graceful pose, I like to draw that. Am I just conditioned for that, or is there real difference between men and women, or what? I don't really know the answer, but I've in my figure drawing classes we've had men fairly often, and I don't enjoy it as much, and I can't get it as easily. I can't get it right as easily. Sometimes I think there's eroticism between me and a female model. Sometimes, maybe that's part of it too. But so maybe I pose that as a question too, or just something to think about. Anybody?
Okay. I think it's so important to think about the difference between the female body and the male body, because they're so different. And when we're drawing, we have a tendency our brain has a tendency to take over and say, I know what a female looks like, I know what a male looks like. But there's essential anatomical differences, and if we don't look and practice drawing them, it's not accurate. It's like Michelangelo had a lot of accuracy, and he drew male women, basically, and painted. And so I think the act of doing both is so important, to be able to view both.
And I will say one other thing is that I can identify with the model. I can feel that pose.
Yeah.
I know what that pose is doing. So that does help. That helps me get it right. Yeah.
And I'm sorry. And just to your question, Rafael, I'm sorry, just one more thing. My youngest child came out as transgender in 2011, and this group was so accepting and loving and understanding and supportive. So, thank you. So, thank you for your question.
And I want to just say, I haven't drawn the male models a million times, but like I said, I know way back at the beginning we had a male model a couple of times, and then when I've traveled occasionally, I've gone to other classes. And it sounds bad. It's like I'm not opposed. I like men, and I like men's body in certain circumstances, but they're boring. I'm sorry. They're very angular. They're up and down. They're like, it just didn't stimulate the graceful, curvilinear, and again, and I agree with Beth, I think it's partly that I can put myself in the place of the model. But I just didn't have an interest in it. It was like arduous. I was like, and I was looking at them. I really was looking at them, and I was going, that's fine. I don't need to do this again. So.
Well, I'm going to just take the opposite. I find men's bodies have just as many interesting curves and forms and muscles. I like drawing the male figure. I don't find it flat or straight. It's different. And occasionally when I was desperate for a male model, I thought, I'll just turn Joyce into a man. And in this drawing, I'm just going to broaden the shoulders. It'll work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So you have to have the male model. And I know even Kenneth Clark, the great writer on the nude, was saying, women's models are just that much more beautiful to draw. And I beg to differ. I mean, there's just a lot of, you can just look at Michelangelo drawings, those drawings of men, sculptures of men, they're gorgeous and beautiful and full of interest. But it just depends. Every artist responds differently. And so for me, they have equal interest. It's just harder to find male models, and I think also in general male models tend to be more armored when they pose, and I find an armored model, I might as well have a plaster cast to draw from, because they are I think socially it's even less acceptable for them to be a model, and so they tend to be armored, take poses that are very dramatic and manly and athletic. And so that's why when I did find the model that I needed, he was so relaxed and at ease. He was present. And so that was a huge difference. And so I can see where that could be, why drawing a male can be really challenging.
I want to appreciate the vulnerability that the models have, and that they bring to the energy in the room.
What I was going to say was, the question, I believe, was, would you consider a transgender male model? Because, or maybe either or.
Or gender fluid.
Because, as when you see a person who is in that state of trans, I wonder if the poses would be more feminine if it were a previously male person, if the poses would be more feminine and graceful, and yet the body might not, and it would be interesting, I think, to work with that a little bit. And I think that's why you all said, yes, we will,
Because after all, the whole purpose of practicing and viewing the live model is to practice seeing and translating it. It doesn't matter what your subject is, whether it's a bowl of fruit or a human being or the landscape. It's the practice of seeing and translating.
I was thinking that I'm most comfortable drawing a model who is comfortable in their own body. And so if they're comfortable, then it frees me to be more relaxed and free in my own drawing. And I have to say, one of my favorite drawings that I still have was as a student. It was a male model who was a dancer, and he was very fun to draw because he was comfortable in his own body, and he had a great body too. So,
Thank you. Excuse me, Greg, can I skip?
I have a comment and then a question. I got to pose my comment as a question, two questions. One is, why does society prefer female figure art? And have you ever seen a male figure nude in the Zoo gallery? That's just a comment. But my question is, having drawn in various arts collections for 20 or 40 years, I've drawn where we were silent, and I've drawn where we had music. I have never drawn where we had conversation going. So I'm fascinated by what you're doing. And so I'm curious to know your thoughts. What is your perspective on your art when you're talking while you're drawing with the group and when you're drawing in isolation in your studio?
Can I do that? I think Beth might have said something about the playing games or eating with people, and how your mind relaxes and goes kind of different place, and your conversations are different. And I think that's some of what happened with us as talking, is that we were physically engaged with something that many of us had the muscle memory for. And so this other part of our mind was released and relaxed. And I think that helped with an honest flow and a comfortable flow. And there were long pauses, there were silences, there was chatter, there was excitement. But I think it also had to do with why people became more vulnerable with each other and able to speak so well with each other, because we were engaging two different parts of our mind.
Such an interesting point.
I found that at times I would be participating in a conversation while drawing, and other times I would just say, "Oh, I'm checking out of this conversation for a while because I now have 90% of my attention on this foot that I'm trying to get." But so I think a lot of us learned to check out of the conversation when we needed to. But I appreciated the conversation, and I find in my studio, I almost work best if I have a book on tape on, because it stops my self-criticism squirrel cage going. So I just keep my hand moving, and I'm not there judging my own work. So it's helpful.
Some of the first artwork that my husband and I bought in Missoula was from the student art show here at the university, and it was male nudes, and they're some of the most beautiful pieces. I have them in my studio, 3 soft pastel drawings done on black paper. They're gorgeous and sensitive more than anything. Is the energy that's in them is the sensitivity between there were 2 figures in each one, and they're just beautiful. So
To have them.
I just want to talk to the difference in making those warrior poses and being a male model who's comfortable and relaxed. That's, I think, some of the difference between why, or maybe that's part of the reason why sometimes we don't see as many wonderful drawings of male nudes. Is it more, and I see society changing, I see young men changing all the time. I know so many young men now that can be so much more relaxed in their bodies. They could put on women's clothes, whether they're heterosexual or homosexual, and be perfectly comfortable and sexy and beautiful. And that the more we have males who are comfortable in their bodies in that way, the more and more I think we're going to see beautiful male nudes, more and more.
Interesting point. Meg, did you have a question? And forgive me for the light is wrong for me, and I couldn't give you the proper designation.
I want to direct this to Beth Lowe. I'm very intrigued by this whole idea of a really different way of teaching art that you have all modeled in your sessions, this idea of a cooperative community. And what I'm hearing in the academic world is a very different scenario, which I consider to be a very masculine, competitive kind of way of teaching art. What if you, like let's say you're just back teaching that figure drawing class, what if you just did away with critiques and you had a more cooperative and you encouraged communication between the students? What do you think you would get at the end of that figure drawing?
Well, I think it's a great idea and a great thing to experiment with, because I feel like I never did apply that when I was teaching. I just followed the teaching model that I grew up in and all my colleagues were doing. So I don't know that I got the right. It probably didn't even occur to me to not have a critique session. And to be completely honest, I do like talking about art, you know. I find it interesting, and I do like to analyze, and I do think analysis is important because that's another place in the brain that you can use to go back into the intuitive. But in workshops, which are a lot of ceramics people in particular do a lot of workshops. Adrian Arleo does tons of workshops, and I think that's much more of that kind of model where it's less critical than supportive. But I do think that over the years of my teaching at the U, I think all of our faculty started to become more nurturing over the years. And I think we came up in a period where it was, I mean, there's even that movie called Art School where you just, it seems like the purpose was to make the student cry. It was much more intense, and we were put much more on the spot as a grad student. And I think during the course of my years at U, wouldn't you agree, Rafael, that it's gotten much more supportive? But still, to have a whole class, I mean, if I were to go back now and teach, I might try and teach a class, no critiques, period, and see what happens. It might be, yeah, it might be really fun. So. Partly feminism.
Women in the workplace.
Pardon me?
I'd say women in the workplace.
Yeah, there's the faculty when I left, it was more than, or it's either 50% or one more than 50% women. So that's a lot of it.
I just want to say my experience in academic figure drawing class was, my teacher was great, and his critiques were spot on, and I learned a ton by having critical feedback. I mean, it's rigorous, and so I don't think there's anything wrong with having critiques, or at least your professor doesn't just come up and say, looking good, you know, better than last week. You know, you really need rigor, and so I had a very rigorous life drawing teacher, but it wasn't boot camp, you know, and you weren't humiliated. And when there was a person who really knocked it out of the park, he would draw attention to that person's drawing, and I mean, besides drawing attention, not in a way to humiliate, like, you just went blind here. He would sort of say, you stopped this is where you stopped looking. And he was spot on, you know, but in terms of when somebody really did a great job, he would really go out of his way to hold it up to the class and say, look at this, you know. And so I think in the teaching, people are coming to the university and taking a class so they can learn, and I think we joined the group to continue our practice of drawing, and I didn't go there to get critiques, but I'll tell you what, when we saw somebody have a good day, we'd say, "Oh, Janet, you're having a great day today."
And we were also free to say, "I'm having a shitty day." Or, "Oh, great, once again I get the foreshortening pose."
There's also a difference between a technical critique and a conceptual critique. So maybe the technical critique, if it's done in a positive way or nurturing way, would be more easily acceptable. But it would be interesting to not, I don't know, it might be interesting to not have conceptual critique at some point. I don't know.
I personally love critique. I don't think there's anything wrong with critique. I think there's something wrong with being disrespectful. And whenever the critique or the facilitator or instructor allows any student to start behaving in an offensive way, they kill the opportunity for the sort of vulnerability we're celebrating here, right? If just one student, one time, tears into somebody else in an invalid way or an unduly mean way, it can just chill the whole thing. And so I personally love critique, and I have really strong rules for critique or analysis of work that are bent on enhancing the instruction for everybody and not allowing it to, I just think we're kind of critiquing critique, and that's not the problem. Yeah. It's bad social behavior anywhere,
right.
You know.
Exactly. I wanted to say my main drawing professor through undergrad and graduate school was Don Bunsey, and he was not one to critique. He was always about just letting people draw. And his main critique, I would have to say, is if he walked by and he did that, just a slight nod, and you knew you were doing well. And otherwise, nothing. And I learned so much just because he allowed you to let go and just draw and not think about it too much. So, but it's kind of the opposite end of what you were saying. So, but it worked for me.
Thank you, Janet. We have something like 3 minutes left, but I'm going to invite our model to my right to have the last word here, because we have to acknowledge that the models were the key to the beginning of the Pattee Canyon Ladies Salon, I think, and so I think it's appropriate for a model to be the last speaker here before we give it to Rafael for the closure. So, Maureen, your thoughts?
I think it's less about critique and more about creating community in those in art environments, in classes or departments, and that the critique can be amazing. You learn so much, but if you have a healthy relationship and people feel connected to one another, it doesn't seem hostile. It's like that's your friend giving you some advice, or that's a person that you respect. And I think that's what I'm seeing, and I feel like I see that a lot when you have female professors kind of build that. They have group projects. They kind of build that in to their curriculum, and that's definitely something I saw in this group.
Thanks, Maureen. So I would like to thank again all of the organizers of this very interesting, wonderful program. Thank the audience for coming out on this cold, cold day. And thank you, Rafael, and others for inviting me to moderate these wonderful and interesting conversation with lovely artists, delightful models. Thank you, Rafael.
Thank you. Let's have a round of applause for these amazing individuals. I used the term earlier that this is a revolutionary group, and what they're doing, because they continue to do it, is indeed a revolution. So thank you very much. For the Montana Museum of Art and Culture, it is a privilege and an honor to have this group represented here and to have their work in our galleries. This is the last major exhibition we're doing before those galleries will be closed for the next 2, possibly 3 years as we transition to a new facility. So for us, it's a landmark. But I think for our community as a whole, this group and what it represents is truly revolutionary and very, very important. So thank you for understanding that vision, sharing that vision, and thanks to the models and the artists who are here, because it's you may not have thought that this was significant, but it's the big significant thing. So thank you very much. So please join us. We have a reception outside waiting for us, and please carry the conversation forward and press on with drawing the figure. Thank you.